tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good evening, everybody. This is the first day after the end of this year's Rains Retreat, 3-month Rains Retreat. In Thailand, it's a celebration day. Say Dakpat Tewo or Tewo Rohana. It's a celebration of something from an event from the life of the Buddha. Say 1 year out of gratitude to his parents, to his mother. The Buddha spent his time teaching his mother, who had been reborn in a heaven realm, teaching her the Dhamma for 3 months. And then the end of the Vasa, he, as if came back to earth, ascended from the heaven realms. So a great celebration by the Buddhist community. You would imagine if the Buddha had left for 3 months and he returned, everyone would have been very happy. So they say everybody came out to welcome the Buddha back and were impressed by his radiance. They had so much faith in the Buddha and the radiant glow of his pure, enlightened citta. Brought up great faith in the laity as he returned. And they had all prepared food to offer to the Buddha on Bindabata, and he was sort of moving down somehow, maybe like on a heavenly escalator, moving down towards earth. So people had to throw food to get it into his bowl. So there's a tradition that's grown up around this in Thailand. Everybody makes certain kind of sweet and wrap it in banana leaves, so that they can be thrown into the monks' bowls as they move past. Unfortunately, the way people are is the celebration and the making of the cakes and the sweets takes over and everybody forgets what it's all about, and it becomes just like a party. That's the nature of our world. We tend to forget the deeper, more important meaning of things and get caught up with the superficial sensuality and pleasure-seeking that we love as human beings. Anyway, that's the kind of origin story behind this day. Yesterday we had the Mahapavarana Day, which refers to the tradition, that's monastic tradition that's developed since the time of the Buddha. The Buddha, in his wisdom and compassion, I think saw the importance of encouraging harmony in the Sangha, and one of the ways we develop harmony in the community, we're all at home, in family, or in the workplace, or just generally in society. Harmony is established partly through skillful communication between people, learning how to talk to each other well, skillfully, how to listen to each other, how to talk. And this ceremony, the Mahapavarana ceremony that the monks did yesterday, reflects that. It's a very brief ceremony, but we call it the ceremony of inviting admonition. And the word admonition is a word that sometimes brings up a little bit of fear in people. Maybe it brings up the perception of authority, somebody who admonishes you, tells you off, punishes you. So maybe the word itself, the English word admonition, is not the best, but what it means is that as spiritual seekers, we're training ourselves, we're learning about suffering and its causes and how to remedy suffering from the human mind. So we're here to learn from our experience as human beings, and particularly understand what causes suffering and how we can abandon it, change suffering as an experience, end it. So we're here to learn, and the Pawarana ceremony is just acknowledging that when you live in a community, a group of people for 3 months, then it's possible that we make mistakes in our speech, our actions. Sometimes we do things rather than following compassion or wisdom, we do things out of greed, anger or delusion. And we can knowingly or unknowingly hurt each other's feelings or offend each other in one way or another. So in case that has happened, it might not necessarily have happened, but in case it's happened, we have this Pawarana ceremony where we come together and we open ourselves up or invite admonition from the rest of the community for anything that was been seen, heard or suspected in our behaviour that was wrong or mistaken or against the Dhamma or the Vinaya. And then we say, well, we'll make amends if something is pointed out to us that we didn't realise or we'd forgotten about. Then we say, well, I'll make amends and try and learn from the experience, which really is what we're doing in Buddhist practice. We have a starting point. We have faith, some faith arise in the Buddhist teachings, some interest, and we start learning and listening and then practicing them. Why? Because as human beings we're not yet perfect. Because we still have experiences of suffering and delusion, and we get things wrong sometimes. We have to learn in order to get out of that. And so, this ceremony, Mahapawarana, is just a one-day, one-off thing, but really it's pointing us to an attitude, the attitude of being willing to learn about ourselves and the way we relate to the world around us, the environment and the people, particularly the people we live with and encounter every day. There's a lot to learn from that. They say one of the reasons the Buddha instigated this ceremony so that monks would come together and invite and open themselves up for admonition from each other. It's because there was one monastery where the monks had decided at the beginning of the 3 months range retreat that they wouldn't talk to each other for 3 months. They thought that would be a good way to practice. And in some ways there's a logic to that. If you cut out all conversation, well, there's less chance of arguments, misunderstandings through speech, disagreements, and so on. But the Buddha saw a danger in that. If you have a group of people living together for 3 months and they never speak, then there may be things that need to be addressed that don't get addressed. There may be people who need support or teaching and are not getting taught. There may be issues or problems that arise that are not being looked into or discussed. So he said this isn't a good way to do things, even though it may seem so. He made a rule that a whole monastery can't do that. And again, the ceremony of Mahapawarana is also reminding monks that we do have this part of our practice where we're learning to practice what we call right speech, which is part of the Eightfold Path. And we're learning to help each other. And the way we help each other in spiritual practice is partly through reminding ourselves of the teachings, explaining things to each other, clearing up doubts, negotiating sometimes, and trying to develop reasonable, satisfactory relations between ourselves and the people around us so that we can deepen our practice, particularly through meditation. So as you probably know, it's quite difficult to meditate if you're always arguing or having problems with the people around you, or there are all kinds of frustrations or negativity simmering under the surface of our relations with other people. This can be quite an obstacle in our practice. So for someone who's keen to learn and to purify their mind and develop mindfulness, wisdom and understanding of where suffering comes from, developing right speech and putting that into action with the people that you live with, work with, interact with is important. As I said, one of the ways we learn is through being reminded of the Dhamma. So teachers and people who share their knowledge and experience with us, who maybe are more mindful than us or know more than us, can often help us in the practice, especially in the beginning. Ajahn Chah used to say, somebody who reminds you of the Dhamma, they're pointing out where the treasure is. Most people in life, if somebody said, "Oh, there's some treasure over there, you should go and get that, get rich." Somebody who's teaching you Dhamma or just reminding you of Dhamma, they're not necessarily a teacher as such, but they're just reminding you of some aspect of the Dhamma. They're somebody who's pointing out treasure. But the treasure here is the treasure of the path that leads to liberation from suffering, the path that leads to the arising of awareness, wisdom, compassion, all the skillful qualities. In one way we develop that path is through being admonished or encouraged or reminded to practice and in the practice by others, other people around us. So one of the qualities the Buddha encouraged spiritual seekers to develop is this ability, the willingness to learn and being one who is easy to admonish. The Buddha said it's such an important quality, it's a blessing, one of the 38 blessings he taught in the Mangala Sutta. It's a blessing if you make yourself easy to teach. I can say it's a blessing from the point of view of being a teacher, because when people make themselves easy to teach, well, things go easily, smoothly. But for oneself, to be easy to teach means one is open to learn. Because one of the biggest obstacles to development of a spiritual path is maybe the thought, I know it all, no one can tell me anything. Or just being very rigid in our various views, opinions, perceptions that we hold to. If we don't know how to, say, put things down, at least temporarily, and open up to hearing fresh ideas, new Dhamma, then sometimes we can get really stuck in the practice because we're not looking more deeply at what we attach to and what's going on in our mind. So making oneself easy to teach is an invaluable quality, and the Buddha praised it and encouraged it. Another thing we learn living in a community, say in a monastery, is you're living in a community where you're not blood relatives. You're people you're related to through your love of the Dhamma or interest in the Dhamma, but coming from all backgrounds, walks of life, countries. In our monastery we have many different nationalities living here, different languages even. So we have something in common, but we're not blood relatives, we're not like family in that sense. So learning to live in a community, whether it's just 2 or 3 of you, or 10 or 20 or 30, that's a skill in itself, learning to live together harmoniously for the good of everyone, because if we can develop harmonious relations with people around us, it will help us to be more settled and more peaceful in ourselves generally, and then that will be a good foundation for deepening insight into the Dhamma, and quietening the mind and developing our meditation. So we have to learn that skill, how to live with others. So the practice of right speech and learning how to interact with other people in a peaceful, respectful, reasonable way, reasonable manner, is an important skill we have to learn. And you see, when you put effort into that, even though it's not always easy, it does bring great reward. But in order to be able to develop right speech with others, one also has to develop right speech, as it were, within oneself. Because the way we think and our attitudes, will tend to come out in what we say and what we do. So we talk about a threefold training in Buddhism. There's training in body, speech and mind, or sila, samadhi and panya. And this highlights the importance of our speech, how we talk to each other, how we relate to each other. The Buddha, in many places in his teachings, he reminded practitioners that what is good speech, right speech. He would say a speech that is spoken at the right time, in the right place. Time and place is an incredibly important factor for speech. It's not always just learning to say what's true. Sometimes the truth is too painful or too disruptive to a situation. Sometimes it's better not to say the truth. That doesn't mean to say to lie, but to just pick your time and place. You think about that when it's the right time to say something. So that means you have to think about the consequences of what you're going to say. How will it affect the other person? How will it affect you? How will it affect the situation? So time and place, the Buddha said, you have to place a lot of importance on that. And then speaking the truth. As one practicing the Buddhist path, the whole purpose of the practice is to realize truth, understand the truth for oneself, because this has a liberating effect on our mind. And our speech will reflect that. If we're always looking for the truth, then we'll shy away from deceitful speech, lying or misrepresenting the truth. So truthful, honest speech is another important factor in what is right speech or good speech, skillful speech. Speech that is beneficial, useful to the person listening, to oneself, to others, to that situation. Because sometimes speech can be destructive or harmful. Having said something, we regret it, or other people are stirred up, and it can even increase. The Buddha said, one way you judge speech, whether it's beneficial or not, is does it increase the greed, the anger, the delusion in the mind of the listener. So, what we talk about to each other is really important. The content of our speech, the mood that we give, the details of whatever it is we're talking about, and particularly the intention behind our speech. Then the kind of words we use. The Buddha encouraged us to use gentle words that are easy to listen to, easy listening, rather than harsh words, abusive words, which are hard for anyone. Even an animal doesn't like abusive words. The mood that comes with harsh, abusive words makes the listener cringe. Their ears, they shy away. They don't want to hear those words, even if there's truthful words, but if they're said in a harsh or abusive way, it's difficult to take and can have unintended or unpleasant consequences. So because of that, the last factor the Buddha said for good speech, correct speech, is establishing your mind in goodwill for yourself, for the listener. Again, very difficult to do just like that. One has to practice, one has to train in observing oneself and getting to know one's intention as one relates to other people. What is my intention as I'm speaking to this person? Is it really goodwill? Or am I just trying to get one over on them or take out my anger on them? Or if it's deceitful, maybe I want something from this person, I want to use them, gain advantage from them. So these 5 factors, speaking the right time at place, that which is true, beneficial, said in gentle, kind words and with a heart of metta, goodwill. And these are kind of guidelines for reflecting on your speech on a daily basis, every day. Day by day we can think back, what have I said today and what kind of intentions did I have? How honest or clear or true was my speech? How useful was it? And this is, anyone who's practiced meditation will quickly understand and see the relationship between what you're thinking and mental activity that's going on in your mind, and then what comes out of your mouth. And Ajahn Chah used to say, if you can't control your mouth, then you're not going to be practicing right speech, because a lot of what we think is not that skillful, because we're not fully trained in the path yet, fully trained in mindfulness, in wisdom, in compassion. All of us experience some negative speech in reaction to different situations that come up. Some of it is just in reaction to memories. You remember something that didn't agree with you, you don't like, so then you get a train of negative thought. Or it may be a physical reaction, when you hurt yourself in some way, or the weather is harsh, or you're feeling tired or hungry. Quite often negative thoughts will come up in reaction to that, and then it will tend to come out of our mouths. So developing mindfulness around speech also leads right back to what are we thinking. And when we meditate, we become more aware of what we're thinking and the kind of conversations we have with ourselves. Before, sometimes we can even be aware of what we're talking to other people. We have to think, well, what am I talking to myself about? And how much of our meditation, if you're honest, you see how much of your meditation is kind of this more negative conversation with yourself, going round in circles, judging yourself, picking holes in yourself. And then when we finish doing that with ourselves, then we tend to do it with other people as well. And it's back and forth. We're either thinking negatively about others or thinking negatively about ourselves. So this is a huge part of our practice, learning to speak skillfully with others and then also speak skillfully with ourselves. And that's training the mind in mindfulness and learning to reflect, first of all, what is skillful speech, what is unskillful speech. When you do live with other people, it's inevitable that people have their different views, their own personal karma, their different views and experiences of life, so they'll express them. So unskillful speech or expressing one's view is not always unskillful, but it may still produce a reaction in someone else who has a totally or very varied view of things. Somebody sees things in one way and you express your view, which is different. There may not yet be any unskillful intention or intention to harm that person, but simply the differences between people still can bring up reactions. So when you do live with other people, again, learning to be mindful of what you hear, establishing your mind in mindfulness every day, almost like being ready for whatever the world may bring to you, and in particularly in the way we speak to each other. Often we have misunderstandings arise, don't we? When people have their own suffering, sometimes they display it in the way they talk. And it's very easy to misunderstand and think, this person seems rather tense or stressed, maybe they don't like me, or we take it in more personal terms often, whereas in fact maybe it's nothing to do with us, it's that person's own personal suffering, but it's just coming out in their speech. So learning to listen to others is as important as learning to speak. You're learning how to establish mindfulness, think about that person, and the Buddha encouraged us to look at each other like relatives, like family, even if we're not blood relatives, family members, but treat each other as if we're relatives. So when you look at someone like your relative, you tend to be more forgiving, more accepting of them. And that's a skill we have to learn, isn't it? We have to keep reminding ourselves to do that. When you practice metta as a meditation, one of the ways you're doing it is seeing the common humanity you have with the other people around you. Nobody likes to suffer. Everybody likes to be happy. Everybody wants to be physically at ease, mentally at ease. We have many things in common, If one, say maybe at the beginning of one's day, one develops a meditation on that, just reminding oneself, everyone that I meet today, they want to be happy, they want to be at peace. Whoever I meet, whether I like them or not, I agree with them or not, this much I know, they don't want to hurt, they don't want to physically experience pain or experience mental pain. If one establishes that understanding and that practice of metta, say at the beginning of the day, and then maintains that through the day, it will affect how you look at people when you encounter them, when they speak to you, when you have different interactions. And there's a lot we can learn from this. We learn from ourselves, about ourselves as we interact with other people, and then we learn about other people. I remember one time I was living at Ajahn Kalyan's monastery in Thailand, and the majority of the monks went away from the monastery for a number of days down to Phuket. They went on an invitation, and I didn't go, I stayed. And so I was the most senior monk left in the monastery. There's probably about 10 monks left, maybe 10 had gone, 10 were left in the monastery. And I was the most senior of the resident monks, but there were 2 visiting monks at that time who had come to stay. One of them was senior to me, one of them was junior to me, but they sat either side of me. The way the monks live in a monastery, we have a little bit of hierarchy depending on who ordained first, who ordained afterwards. So at meal times, or when there was a meditation meeting or chanting, any kind of meeting, you sit according to the seniority, who's junior, who's senior. So one sat ahead and one sat behind. And the first day everything was going quite smoothly, and I was having to run the monastery because I was the senior resident monk left there. But these 2 monks were quite new to the monastery, so I didn't know them. And they were not familiar with the place, and they didn't know each other. So gradually, over a period of a few days, they started to fall out, didn't like each other through character, whatever different reasons. They had different views on the way of practice, different character. So they started to fall out, except for they were still monks, so they were quite restrained and careful what they said, but they were looking for a way out of their dislike for each other. So the way they decided to do that was to tell me how bad the other monk was, because I was sitting between them. So I started to experience this situation where one monk was on my right, talking into my ear, telling me how bad this other monk was, and then another monk on my left telling me how bad the monk on my right was. And this went on many times a day for several days. And it was kind of a crescendo. The intensity of their dislike was increasing, and the way they were dealing with it was to tell me how bad each other were. So it was quite a good time for me to practice, learning to listen to somebody's dislike of another monk, absorbing the information through my ears. And of course I wanted to practice, do my own practice, as we all say, I want to do my practice, my own practice. So I thought, how can I deal with that? So first of all, I tried practicing mindfulness of breathing. So I'd breathe in, breathe out, and one monk would be telling me a lot of negative on this side, and then another monk telling me a lot of negativity on that side. Breathe in, breathe out. No, it didn't really work. Sometimes just doing your breathing meditation doesn't work in these situations. So I thought, well, I'll try and practice metta, which sounds quite reasonable. So practice my metta every day for each monk, because I didn't have any particular bad feeling towards the 2 monks. So each morning I say, I wish Venerable well, I hope he finds peace, I hope he gets on and progresses in his practice. I wish Venerable well, I hope he finds peace. Maybe my metta wasn't strong enough in those days, I don't know, but it didn't seem to be working. They were getting more agitated, more upset with each other. So this went on, and I thought, oh, what can I do? I seem to be absorbing a lot of negativity from these 2 people. So I changed my whole practice. I carried on practicing metta, but I started to place all my mindfulness on my ears. and just the sound contact, the contact of their words every day, absorbing the negative words. I'd know the meaning, of course, but just observing ear contact, the consciousness arising, observing the words, knowing that the meaning of them was quite negative, but just trying to maintain mindfulness and equanimity with sound, both ears. So for about 5 days, my main meditation was just keeping my awareness on my ears, which is totally new to me. I didn't normally do that. But in this case, it seemed to work. I started to develop some strong equanimity around this problem. And these two monks were both kind of attacking each other through me. There was one added bit of spice to the mix, as it were. One of them we knew had actually been convicted of murder and spent a number of years in jail, and then he came out of jail and ordained as a monk to try and rehabilitate himself and change his ways. So that was a very good intention. But he was a very tense character, which is possibly where the dislike arose between these two monks. He's a very tense character, and everyone in the monastery was very careful because they didn't want him to lose his temper because they didn't know what he would do. So that added a little bit of, put a little bit of edge on the situation. So not only as aware that these two monks didn't like each other, as aware one of them may, or maybe both of them may end up actually doing something extreme. So all the more challenge to keep the metta going, practice the equanimity, and I just practiced for 5 days awareness of sound arising and ceasing up my ears. Tried to practice right speech as well, to talk to them reasonably, and luckily after 5 days there hadn't been any bad incidents other than a little bit of unskillful speech. But I found it worked very well for me. I became very peaceful after that and really wasn't too bothered by them at all. So that worked for me. So sometimes in life it's like that. You get into situations where you live with other people and some of them like you, some of them don't. Some of them will let off steam talking it to you. Some of them will be giving you cold shoulder, stony silence. You know, human beings, we have different ways we react, different ways we deal with situations, but in the end it comes back to us, isn't it? How are we going to deal with every situation and the people we meet and the situations we get into? So our first mode of practice might be to practice right speech, not to stir people up if they are angry or upset, not to unnecessarily encourage arguments, always to return to the place of metta. Think about the words you use, whether it's the right time, the right place to speak or not. And you find if you do that, you get into that habit, then when you come to meditate, you don't have too much stuff bubbling up in your mind. You have some memories, you have some things will be coming up. But if you keep practicing like this regularly, well, you should get better at it. And you can find that by becoming more mindful, more aware of your speech on the outside, then that will feed back into what's going on mentally on the inside. And just as we want other people to speak well with us, and be reasonable, practice right speech with us, we start to learn to practice right speech with others, but also right speech with ourselves. Because if you become more aware, you observe your mind more over time, you'll see a lot of the verbalization we have is very negative, useless, not very beneficial, not very helpful. And your mind starts to shy away from that. It's not worth thinking like this. And this is how we train our mind. We can train our mind the way we think, develop more skillfulness in this, develop more mindfulness, more wisdom, more compassion. And ultimately we develop more states of calm, serenity through the practice of mindfulness and states of samadhi. Because little by little you're readjusting the mental chatter. So one, you're more in control of it and you're using it more, and two, you're letting go of the negative mental chatter which just disturbs the mind. then you can experience maybe some deeper peace. And part of training the verbalization process in the mind is also to experience some of the space in the mind when the verbalization, the mental chatter actually goes quiet for a while, which it can do if one puts effort into training mindfulness. One can develop, an appreciation of the more subtle kinds of mind states, the mind that is still, silent. You've had your conversations, you've abandoned them, and now the mind goes quiet. You're still aware, you're not asleep, you're not asleep to the world, you're still aware, but the mind is just quiet, spacious, with this quality we call the knowing. Sometimes that's hard to develop, or for most people that's quite hard to develop in the beginning. So another way you can kind of quieten the mind down is give it a theme to meditate on for a while. Develop a discursive meditation where again you're training your mind, the thinking mind, to think skillfully around a theme. And some people have that doubt. They think, well, I don't know much about the Dhamma or what the Buddha taught. I don't really know how to do that. Well, you can actually use just knowledge you have from your life. It could be something as simple as the job that if you have a job, you have a job to do every day, there'll be knowledge that you have based around that. Actually picking up that knowledge, say you buy and sell things, you do some form of trade, how to do that job well. You set yourself a little task in a period of meditation, say 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You pick that task up. You say, well, I'm just going to think about the job I have to do today or tomorrow or whenever. How can I do it well? How can I complete that job well, successfully? What do I need to do that? You're just thinking through the information that you already have. Or if you're a student, information based around a subject you're studying, you bring it up in your meditation, mindfully, focus your mind, train the mental faculty, the verbalization and the thinking mind, train it to just focus on one particular theme and stay within that theme mindfully. So it could be a subject that you're studying, it could be a hobby, could be a job of work you do. It could be something simple like a meal you have to cook. To cook a meal, you need ingredients. You have to know how many people you're going to cook for, what dish you're going to provide, how many tasks and parts to that dish, that meal you have to prepare, what needs to be done, whether it needs to be put in an oven, fried, things that need to be chopped, the ingredients you need to prepare. Thinking how to make a meal can be a meditation. Or monks do this like with sewing a robe. You learn to sew a robe partly through just thinking it through as a mental activity for a period of time, using mindfulness, using the verbalization of the mind. And you'll find it's quite has a calming effect on the mind. It steadies you and brings your mind to a sort of initial state of one-pointedness, just using the thinking mind in this way, in a discursive meditation. You could do it based on a theme of Dhamma as well, so people do this, recollecting their sila, recollecting the practice of generosity, recollecting the Buddha. There's many Dhamma themes we can use as well. Or you can use a more worldly theme in the beginning, just to absorb the mind's attention, focus it, bring it to the present moment and learn to pay attention and train the verbalization, and particularly to let go of a lot of the negativity and the distractions we have. Learning to do this, then when the mind is more settled, one could move to a more traditional meditation object like the breath. The same effect comes when you practice chanting. Just now we did chanting. Why do people chant? Well, one is because it's a form of meditation. When you're chanting, you'll probably notice when you chant, part of the mind wants to run away from the words and the sound to think about other things. But because chanting is a very clear, very direct, simple meditation object, it's not that difficult to keep coming back to the words, to remember the words, to keep flowing along with the chant until it's completed. It's a way of training the mind. And it's quite hard to say fall asleep when you're chanting. The words have a good meaning, so you can reflect on the meaning of the words as well, if you know the translation. And it will show you how to train your mind in that situation. Because every time your mind runs away to think about what you're going to do tomorrow, or you've got some negativity and unhappy with something, you bring it back. And much of our meditation is really based around that simple fact, how to bring your mind back to the present moment, to cut through the mental proliferation, the conversations we have, just as in daily life when we're in with somebody else, you have to be mindful of your speech, your conversations. Generally, the longer you speak, the more conversations you have, the more risk there is, the more risk of falling into negativity or saying something or falling into a disagreement or saying something, getting caught into a useless chatter. There's more chance of that the more you do it. Well, similarly with your meditation, if you don't learn to train your mind to focus on various objects, it's so easy for you to sit there and just proliferate and think a lot of many useless or negative things over a period of time. And we've all done this. We've all had the experience where we've been sitting there, body is there in the meditation posture, but the mind is off 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, going all around the world, up and down, happy, unhappy, thinking about this, thinking about that. We can do that very well. We can fantasize about things we love. We can fantasize about things we hate. We do that. We need to learn to bring the mind more under our control, and particularly the verbalizations and the thinking mind. In the beginning, that's probably our biggest obstacle. We think and we think and we think and we think. Learning to use the mind, train the mind. So one way is through discursive meditation. Training the mind to put attention on a theme and just sticking with that theme. And most people will find if that's going well, then body and mind start to relax. We feel better in ourselves. One of the experiences people keep coming back to in their practice, they say, well, they had this really good meditation where they've experienced some real calm and peace, but then when they finish the meditation, they go off and they have to go back to their real life, their real world, and interact with other people. And then, of course, get caught into conversations, have disagreements, different views and opinions come up, find all the peace and the mindfulness disappears. So this is an ongoing practice. The more you meditate, the more you realize the important thing is not only when you're meditating, but when you finish the meditation. Meditation is really a state of mind. We practice in all postures, standing, sitting, walking, lying down, and learning to preserve mindfulness. When you finish your meditation, you go off and you do other things, or you're talking to people, learning to preserve mindfulness as you do that. So again, coming back to the practice of right speech, reflecting on our speech, developing mindfulness of what we say through our day and what we do as well, will help to promote that, help to promote mindfulness in daily life as we interact with the world. And this is the thing most people complain of, isn't it? How can you practice mindfulness when life is so busy, there's so many things we have to do, or you have to interact with difficult people? This is how we practice it, preserving mindfulness of speech, mindfulness of our actions, and keep coming back to the Dhamma, as in the paying attention to the truth as it's manifesting in the present moment. If we keep doing this, then there's a chance the mind becomes more peaceful, more happy within itself, and that's where we learn. So today, first day after the range retreat, Some people think, oh, that's the end of the retreat and that's the end of my practice. But no, we still have our practice to do. Just as when we finish our meditation, we shouldn't leave it and let the mind just go wild and lose our mindfulness. As we leave the retreat, we shouldn't give up our practice either. Just continue the practice every day. Practice meditation, practice chanting, listen to the Dhamma, practice mindfulness, practice right speech, right action. This is how we incorporate the Eightfold Noble Path into our daily life. And it is a complete path. These 8 factors all work together to train this human mind. So often we see practice of the Dhamma as something you do, when you meditate or when you're on retreat. But our mind, our body goes with us every day wherever we are. So we've always got practice to do. One monk I know went and asked Ajahn Chah, said, "Oh, where's the best place for me to go and practice?" Ajahn Chah probably rolled his eyes. I wasn't there, but Ajahn Chah probably rolled his eyes and just said, the best place to practice is right here, right now. There is no better place to practice. Practicing the Dhamma is not about going here to this special place or going on retreat or doing this, doing that. It's about where you're at right now. What are you thinking right now? What are you saying right now? What are you doing right now? This is how we learn. So I'll leave you with these words for your contemplation tonight and wish you all well, and please continue with your practice.